Ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to this town hall to talk about the impact that Kratom has had. And specifically, we're going to be talking today about veterans and the access that they benefit from with a substance like Kratom that has, in the many hearings that I've been across the country, I hear it over and over again from the mouths of those veterans who have said it saved their lives in many cases. And it's amazing to see the number of people that do that. And we know that that's true for first responders. We know it's true for many that are in the service of our country and in our communities who rely on this. And when the initial recommendation was made in 2016 by the FDA to schedule Kratom, if you look at the public comments that were sent to the Drug Enforcement Administration, of the 23,232 comments, the number of military and first responders who spoke in favor of Kratom remaining legal was amazing, because they could testify to it. And that, I think, is a reason why we're here today. We're going to have this panel discussion. Our first speaker is going to be a champion of Kratom in the United States Congress. And I can tell you that this is a critical part of the advocacy effort that we're involved in order to assure that Kratom remains legal to consumers who want to responsibly consume it in the United States. In 2016, when the FDA tried their recommendation through the DA to schedule, Congressman Matt Salmon, who today is here, Matt, we all owe him a round of applause. Matt Salmon recruited Mark Pocan, a Democrat from the state of Wisconsin. And Wisconsin, by the way, is a banned state for Kratom right now, and he's trying to unwind and undo that for us. But he's also a co-sponsor with Congressman Bergman on the federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And from 2016 to today, look at the difference. In 16, we were under threat of Kratom being banned. And here in 2024, the FDA is on their heels, because the science is proving that we were right in 2016 and they were wrong. We're going to talk about that a little bit before we're done here today, but the FDA is on their heels. And now what we're asking is that Kratom be responsibly regulated to make sure that every consumer, when they purchase a Kratom product, has confidence that it meets good manufacturing standards, that it's labeled properly, and that the formulations have the serving sizes and recommended serving sizes that will allow them to responsibly consume Kratom products. That's our goal, that's what we believe in, and I know many of you are vendors of Kratom products, and we appreciate your support for that objective. So we're going to start with our town hall today with inviting Congressman Bergman to come. He is a co-sponsor of the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act. The flyers describe his background as a former Lieutenant General of the Marine Corps, and I can tell you I'm honored to be surrounded on both sides by Marines. And their obvious stature in the community as defenders of what we do. So Congressman Bergman will invite you to come up and lead out on our town hall.
Thank you, and literally, I just got off an airplane from DC, so we got here as quickly as we could, given Las Vegas traffic, and the most important person in the room here with me is Amelia Burns, who's sitting over there. She's my deputy chief, and the point is, there's someone who may want to share business cards or get contact information and all that, but she's the person that really kind of runs the show. Yeah, I guess the cat's out of the bag that I'm a Marine, retired Lieutenant General. To put a little more meat on that bone, I'm the highest ranking combat veteran ever elected to Congress in the history of the country. All that really means, and by the way, today would have been my mother's 110th birthday. But in the words of my mother, don't get too full of yourself. So the point is, all that means is that we got some potentially underperforming, lazy, retired 4-stars. Because any one of them could run and knock me off that perch. So again, in honor of my mother's, what would have been her 110th birthday today, I channel her a lot. I was raised by a Minnesota farm girl and I'm married to an Iowa farm girl, so I know manure when I hear it and see it. But let's get to the serious part here. It's all serious. Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, seek to understand before trying to be understood. Begin with the end in mind. And then there's another author, Simon Sinek, who one of his books is Begin with Why, or something like that. And when you think about the why, and my role is not as a Marine, my role is not anything other than I am a member of the House of Representatives, and I was sent there to represent my constituents and work with 434 others on a myriad of issues. Some are easier for people to grasp and get onto than others. And I'm going to give you a tangential example, and then we'll come right back to Kratom. When you hear the word psychedelics, it is a word that immediately something strikes in our mind in one way or the other. Good, bad, unique, the 60s, all of those kinds of things. Well, about a year ago, Lou Correa, who's a Democrat from Los Angeles area, and I founded the PATH Caucus, Psychedelic Advancing Therapies, because we believe through our research and what's going on out there with whether it be ketamine, MDMA, moving on to mushrooms and other different therapies, our country has not had any really big breakthrough therapies since the 1950s, and that's because we've become a society of pills. It is. There's a pill for this, and if there's not a pill for this, then there's a different pill for this, and this is how it works. So when you think about breakthrough therapies, I believe my role as a member of the House of Representatives is to work with all my colleagues who are willing to this is where the Marine comes in, not be afraid to take a first step, not be afraid to be the first one out there to get hammered by those who either don't understand or probably more seriously won't understand what it is you're trying to do. So with Mark Pocan from Milwaukee, one of the things we do have in common, we both root for the Packers. So, but to have a sponsor like him, to join him from the Democrat side, we're beginning to build slow momentum. But again, what is the role of the House of Representatives and in the federal government? We already heard about, what is the FDA doing or tried to do, whether it was the right thing to do, what was their motive. I believe the role of the House of Representatives is to kind of control the bureaucracies. And the way you control them is not allow them to do what the hell they damn well please. You have to put the guidelines on them, because if you don't, they will come up with bad things, bad reasons, and bad results. And that's where we have a battle to fight here as we move forward. But, we did a letter in 2018 that was, to the FDA to lift, the idea that it's misleading warning against kratom. I mean, that's some of the little things that I've done. Authored an op-ed on the Hill back in July of 23, discussing the benefits and that what again, Mark and I are collating. And of course, we got HR 5905, which is the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And basically, you start with, in most cases, the way it works in DC, you're going to start with a hearing. So we want the FDA to hold a hearing, establish a task force on health and safety of products that contain kratom. It's logical stuff. It doesn't happen overnight, but you have to build the momentum. And it's not so much making more people understand what it is, It's making more people understand and accept what it's not or what it's purported to be, the scare tactics, used by those. So, put simply, we want to stop the tainted products, but don't blanket ban anything that has kratom in it, because you're guilty by association, and there's just a little bit. There will be an agency that tries to knock it down. We maybe you watch the news. We have our challenges right now in DC getting anything done. But that doesn't mean we're not getting anything done, because when the media is telling you we're doing this, this, and this, really guys like Mark and I are working behind the scenes, not getting caught up in the soap opera media stuff, and just working it day after day to make sure that we're going to get the right things done. This is a long game. We know, for example, we just got language going back to psychedelics. We just got language in the VA, Veterans Administration, just agreed to do studies, control studies on psychedelics. That's a big deal, because it may sound like I'm against bureaucracies. I'm not. A good bureaucracy takes in an idea, turns it around, and gives you option A, B, or C. A bad bureaucracy, you put the idea in and nothing ever happens, or it's a bad outcome, or whatever it is. But we've made some steps, I believe, in the last year and a half, in moving the bureaucracies forward, whether it's getting the FDA to make sure it does what it's supposed to do, getting the VA to take some risk and do the studies. But as a veteran, yeah, I guess I can use this. I tell people will mention something about this, that, or the other thing. I say, well, as a Marine, and it was in all the other services too, we've been lab rats in a lot of experiments over time. Anybody here old enough to remember the shotgun when you were going through basic training and you lined up in the dispensary and there was a corpsman on your left and a corpsman on your right, and they had the gun that had several tubes, and you just stood there. The one thing you didn't want to do was move, because the needle come out, it would slice you, but you got all your vaccinations in about 4 steps. Okay, I'm not saying good or bad, and it is what it is, but for us to not do everything we can, especially when it comes to products like kratom, when we see there's been results for addiction recovery, everything, all the good things that go along with it. If we don't continue to press for a better governmental role, it doesn't necessarily mean more. It just means a clean, clear government role. Then we're not doing our job in the Congress. So I'm more than happy to experiment with things that logically will treat addiction. And when you think about it, what does addiction lead to in so many cases? Suicide. And how shameful if we don't play our role to lower, I don't know if we will ever eliminate, but by God, we need to be hitting it hard so that we can give these veterans and their families a life that is full, a life that is meaningful, and that they know, and then they can spread the word to others, because we're all at risk in some way, shape, or form at different times in our lives. But this is about doing the right thing for the right reason. So having said that, as you can tell now that I'm a politician, I can probably stand and talk forever and not say a damn thing. But that's an art, not a science. I'd like to just kind of stop here at this point, and let's turn it over, because I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Bergman. And I can tell you that when it comes to members of Congress, back in 2016, when Matt Salmon led the charge, we had, within 2 weeks, 25 Democrats and 26 Republicans that signed the letter telling the DA not to do it. One on the Senate side was a little more difficult, because we had 9 members of the Senate that signed our letter, and then Senator Cory Booker called me in and he said, "I'm not signing your letter." And I said, "I'm sorry to hear that." He said, "Well, it's not because I don't believe it shouldn't be scheduled, it's because this letter doesn't speak my voice." He said, "My voice is about over-criminalization." He said, "You put a ban in and you were going to put people in jail. We already have a drug war that's failed and our prisons are filled with people that are there unnecessarily and incorrectly." He said, so he did a separate letter. And we ended up with a total of 13 members of the U.S. Senate, some of which signed Senator Booker's letter. But the thing that I learned from that, the Drug Policy Alliance, Grant Smith, who's one of their national leaders there, they're great advocates for Kratom and its accessibility. He said, "You've got to meet someone that is really a champion in this area of over-criminalization and fighting the drug war." And he introduced me to Diane Goldstein, who is the executive director of the Law Enforcement Action Project. And it has been a blessing in my life personally to get to know Diane, and every one of you should consider her a blessing in your lives too. I want her to come up and tell about her experience here with the Kratom movement. Thank you.
I normally would never correct Mac about anything, but it's Law Enforcement Action Partnership. No, it's fine. First of all, thank you. I'm really proud to be here with some esteemed panelists. Nice to see you again. I'm going to just give you a quick rundown of my background. I started in policing in 1983. Yes, I am that old. And I retired as the first female lieutenant in Redondo Beach Police Department in Southern California in 2004. I was the second female sergeant, and when I was a sergeant, I ran our Special Investigations Unit, which included finding career criminals, doing hand-to-hand buys, and working in conjunction with the DEA and a number of other federal partnerships in the drug war. Personally, I have also lost my brother to the drug war when he died from a polydrug overdose in 2007 after being a person in recovery for 20 years and losing his job and his access to his health care, his therapist, his psychiatrist, and his psychotropic meds, and he started self-medicating again. And when he did, he got right back into the criminal justice system. So I have seen the failures of our drug control policy because the emphasis has traditionally been on supply-side interventions, which are literally the most harmful. And so I want to really talk about why we never want to have Kratom on a schedule. This is so critically important in the work that we do, because by putting Kratom on a schedule, and in particular in Schedule 1, it will create tremendous unintended consequences, just like we did with cannabis, and we're at the Champ Show. You see where we're at now. It's really amazing to me, and in some aspects I'll joke and say it felt like I was back in high school behind the library with all the smoke, right? What I know is if the purpose and the intent of our drug control strategies are primarily, the first and most important thing should be about saving people's lives, not churning people through a criminal justice system where there is no adequate or effective treatment for their substance use disorder or their mental health issues. That doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable for criminal behavior. But first and foremost is, since the advent of the modern day drug war, we have been trying to treat a public health issue with the criminal justice system. We have been trying to solve socioeconomic issues like homelessness and a variety of other issues with people who answer the phone in the middle of the night, because we have not invested in the right infrastructure and resources that are much more efficacious in crime prevention, preventing substance use disorder, and getting people the treatment and the quality of life that they need. So last year, according to CDC, over 107,600 Americans lost their lives to the drug overdose epidemic. This is upended the previous historical record, and this death toll has been made worse by the acute toxicity of our current illicit drug supply. And so when I look around in my community, because I live here in Vegas, I would rather have people have access to kratom than I would to fentanyl, because the toxicity level is in fact less. And so that's something for all of us to really think about and consider. But from a law enforcement perspective, I do work at overseas a lot. I've gone to CMD in Vienna a number of times. And I see some pretty significant changes that in the last 13 years of this public advocacy work that I do. But what I know today, because I talk to law enforcement professionals across the world, is that both here and abroad, we've recognized that we can't use arrest as a means to address the substance use disorder epidemic. Saving lives and reducing crime and disorder is not mutually exclusive. A response that we need to emphasize is that it requires a paradigm shift towards evidence-based practices. And this is what I love about kratom. There is empirical research and evidence there that shows its efficacy in saving lives. But what we don't have, which is the exact same issue and the problem that we have right now with the agricultural hemp farm bill, is there's no consumer protection acts. And part of our jobs in law enforcement is not just to ensure public safety, but it's also to ensure public health. So I commend the Congressman for introducing this act, and also psychedelics. I do a ton of work with psychedelics. Officer Health and Wellness is, I know a lot of active duty and retired police officers that use kratom rather than using opioids to treat their physical disabilities. And one of the things that I think I have a lot of hope for is we're finally understanding that first responders in the United States in particular have seen a ton of trauma. It's not what we see with the vets, but we have a 5 times higher rate of suicide than civilians do. We have a tremendous substance use disorder and alcoholism problems in law enforcement. We have high divorce rates. We have spillover violence. And if we are not taking it out on our families, we're taking it out in the communities. So what we need is access to plant-based products that are safe, that reduce the likelihood of us becoming addicted. Down the road, I'm already working on model policies on access to psychedelics and to other, to MDMA and to cannabis for law enforcement agencies who are finally starting to recognize that the drug war has had so many unintended consequences, including on the ability for their own officers or firefighters to access help. And so I'll end it on that because I know prohibition hasn't worked. It hasn't worked since alcohol prohibition. And what I always share with law enforcement is the most famous police chief in the United States is August Vollmer. August Vollmer was the police chief of Berkeley, LAPD, 4th president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And back in the 1920s and 30s, he stated that law enforcement was never going to solve addiction. As scientists and researchers, and that law enforcement being used to arrest people for drug use, alcohol, gambling, and even sex work, he was really visionary back then, would only engender disrespect for law enforcement, and it would cause corruption because we were investigating moralistic crimes, that we should leave those policies to people that were better equipped to solve those problems. So thank you very much.
On August the 16th of 2018, unbeknownst to anyone in the kratom community, the Assistant Secretary for Health, Dr. Brett Chua, withdrew the FDA's second recommendation for scheduling. That decision was kept secret for more than 2 years because the FDA invoked what was known as the ongoing regulatory review section of the FOIA Act. And it was only after the change in administrations that one of his staffers called me and said, you need to know that we withdrew the scheduling recommendation. We were not allowed to give you that letter because the FDA refused to let us do it. But it's there. And I said, well, can you give me the letter now? And he said, no, but you can ask a member of Congress to do it. And that's when Mark Pocan and Burgess Meredith of Virginia asked for, and we received the letter, the scathing withdrawal letter. But it didn't answer a lot of the questions that we had about how did this happen? How did the FDA gin up this so-called 8-factor analysis and claim that kratom needed to be scheduled? And in the journey to try to understand that, we ended up meeting with Jim Carroll, who was then the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy in the White House. And he shed some light on what the FDA's position was, his inquiries to them. And today we have one of those champions who was willing to question, not rubber stamp, but question the FDA about their stance. And that was a major contributing factor to Dr. Chua withdrawing that recommendation. And we're honored today to have Jim Carroll here to address us for a few minutes. Jim.
I did want to give you a little bit of background before I talk about the FDA. First off, Lieutenant General, I'm scared of running the same problem. I'm based in DC. I used to be with the federal government. I could talk a little bit longer than anyone wants to. So I'm going to rely on you. I did get hired at one point by a 4-star retired combat veteran Marine, John Kelly. And I expect no less than you to yank me if I go too long.
I'll give you the Kelly treatment.
That just scares me. I was working for General John Kelly at the White House as the Deputy Chief of Staff when General Kelly was the Chief of Staff. And as General Kelly said, he deserved another combat medal for being at the White House. Different story. I probably have to go to the convention hall, spend a little more time with some of those booths, talk about some of them. I do want to talk about drug policy, and I want to make a bit of a distinction here. When we talk about a war on drugs, there's no question that the war on drugs for people that have an addiction has failed. I don't think anyone can argue that. That doesn't mean there shouldn't be a war on drug traffickers, those who are completely guilty of tricking innocent people to going down that path. And when we talk about 107,000 people, I think it's close to about 110 now. They've upped the numbers a bit as they're getting a little more accurate. Obviously, the number's going to be even higher than that. There's a lot of parents, especially, who hate the word overdose because their child did not have a substance use disorder. They thought they were taking something else, which they shouldn't have done. Full confession, I did a lot of stuff when I was 16 I shouldn't have done, but it wasn't fatal. And sadly, that's what we're facing now. And I want to thank Congressman Bergman for going down to the border recently and being a champion on protecting really not just adults, but really our children from the evils that are coming into our country. Because all of these drugs that are killing us, and I mean that, I want to talk about kratom not being one of those. The drugs that are killing us are coming in from outside of the United States. They do not originate here. And thanks to the Congressman for doing that work to truly protect all of us. Let's get a little background, and it was hit on earlier. I want to give you some background about the concept of banning. People hear about kratom, they're worried about it. I got a phone call from a lawyer in DC. I'm a lawyer, I do work with the American Kratom Association, and I'm used to advocating on behalf of a client, right? I tried too many trials. I started my career as a criminal prosecutor, prosecuted a lot of drug cases. I spent too much time arguing on behalf of a client. I'm not here in that capacity today. Sorry, I'm not going to argue on your behalf. I'm going to argue for my daughter. And that's my capacity. My daughter is in recovery from a complete and utter dependence on opioids. In that case, the bad actor was her doctor. And you all know that story. That doctor, my daughter, was seeing a female physician. She's no longer prescribing pills to anyone, I could say. But we got off incredibly lucky. My daughter is now 7 years into recovery. My daughter is, I mean, the most shocking thing I'm going to say today is that my daughter is pregnant with my grandchild. I know, way too young to be a grandfather, but that's the incredible true story. That's it. It shows that recovery is real. And that's what the message I think that all of us are trying to convey today. But a handful of states have gotten together and decided that we need to ban a substance that bans work. So half a dozen, it's grown for a while, got together and enacted a ban. In the first year, there was a $60 million black market. That was alcohol in 1920. $60 million black market, the first year of it being enacted. Obviously, it did work. We've talked about that. That doesn't mean we give up the fight against traffickers. It doesn't mean we abandon that. What it means is that we recognize that recovery is real, research is real, science is real, and that we do not give up on people in recovery. Again, I'm having a hard time saying general versus congressman here because I know you wear both hats. And I think maybe as best the general said, one of the things that we're seeing in untold numbers are also veterans who are facing mental health issues, PTSD issues, who are being further stigmatized by trying something that is helping them. But if we enact a Schedule I ban, that would work, right? Guess what fentanyl is? Schedule II. Yeah. And so let's realize what actually works and what doesn't. Let's recognize that research won't be done, certainly not as easily, if this is made a Schedule I. Why should we be scared of research? Why should we be banning the ability to see what helps? I was at the White House working for a Republican, Donald Trump, when we licensed the first research into marijuana producing a derivative, Epidiolex, that helps children with epilepsy. Why would we try to do the same for kratom? It makes no sense. So what the FDA did in 2018 was come to me as the US Drug Czar, overseeing the $38 billion the federal government spends, overseeing all of DEA, all of the lines of efforts of prevention, law enforcement, treatment, and sustaining people in long-term recovery, and said, we've got the next killer. Oh my God, it's killed a dozen people. They went through it, it's like, this kratom stuff is a killer, and it's on the streets. I'd heard of it, didn't really know much about it. Put a phone call into my friend at HHS, Brett Chawah, who is the Assistant Secretary for Health. And of course, FDA filled my head, right? This stuff is about to kill you. You look at it wrong, and it's going to kill you. You read it, you see the flashing neon sign, and you're damn lucky to be alive. Right? Because that's sort of sum up what we're seeing. So I called Brett. Of course, I got his voicemail because, we're all sort of busy running around. He calls me back, and he's like, did they talk to you about kratom? I'm like, yeah, what is this? This sounds bad. And he's like, are you banning it? Or what are you doing? Or I'm like, doing nothing. Next stop is the DEA administrator. By the way, I just talked to the DEA administrator. He's like, now my business partner reminded him that I was here. And he was like, I cannot talk about that. Oh, I can't. I said to Brett, they're on the way to see Udom, and then, I don't know where they're going. And he's like, the FDA is lying, or words to that effect. This is a family-friendly audience. He said that there's a lot more to this. Do not let them ban this. Brett Chawah, Assistant Secretary for Health, the highest-ranking medical professional at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Everyone heard of the Surgeon General, right? Big tough guy, wears a uniform. Not a real uniform, I think the general would say, it's sort of a quasi-uniform. He oversees the Surgeon General and all of the public health board. He gets a car, he goes to, he's like, where's Udo? I said, he's at the airport, he just called me. He got in the car, had the driver race to Ronald Reagan Airport in DC, pull Udo into our conference room and say, we're not signing this. FDA is wrong, and I think they're intentionally wrong, and they're hiding stuff from us. And so that led to the letter that Matt talked about from Brett, was a scathing rebuttal denying everything that the FDA had said to me, everything that they had said to Udom. And so thankfully, we withdrew it. So the point is, for whatever reason, and that's probably another subject for another day, is the FDA has it wrong. What they are trying to do won't help the people. And I'm sure there's good people there. I'm sure they want to do the right thing, but they're not. So it's time to put people who are suffering from an SUD, a substance use disorder, first. It's time to put our veterans first. The bottom line is it's time to really put the science first. I try to let my faith guide me. And because of my faith, I'm pro-life. What that means is we will save anyone with any means necessary to give them another shot. So we carry naloxone, and what it also means is we let them access medication, substances, or research that helps them. Thank you, Mac, for allowing me to be here today.
One of the primary jobs that I have at the American Kratom Association is to try to build relationships with public policy leaders. And you see here today that I've done a pretty good job of that, because you've got the former drug czar of the United States, you've got a United States Congressman, you've got one of the leading advocates in the law enforcement community. But as I have traveled around the country and listened to hearing after hearing, what we're really here about are the individuals who have experiences with Kratom that has changed the trajectory of their lives. And we're honored to have with us today one of those individuals to serve as a voice for the hundreds of advocates that I've heard from. And we'll invite Will Marsh to come and tell his story about Kratom. Will himself was a Marine and a veteran, and he found Kratom.
It's kind of a hard leap to follow, all these incredible, as you said, legislators and politicians up here, but I will try my best. As Max said, my name is Will Marsh. I am from Raleigh, North Carolina, and have the privilege to come out here today to talk about something that's passionate to me, Kratom. So thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, John, Jim, Diane, Congressman, all for being here. This is an incredible opportunity. To back up a few years, as we just mentioned, I was in the service years ago. I did one stint, combat tour in the Middle East, over in Egypt in 2011, 2012, when they were dealing with some civil uprising over there. And for like most 21-year-olds, it was kind of probably one of the most exciting things I've ever done. I also became exposed to things that I wasn't normally used to dealing with as a child. It's a diverse culture, drugs and therapeutic remedies, vices were a thing over there, both over there and in the military in general. And so when I came out and when I finished, I was not adequately equipped as a 22-year-old to be able to handle those things in society. We started a very negative path downwards toward addiction. Things I was getting into that I didn't even understand how I was damaging myself or my future or my health. And so it was actually 5 years ago, back in 2019 in February, this exact week, I was here at this convention center, in this hall actually, for a different trade show. And those of you who have dealt with addiction may know that traveling can be an absolute nightmare. You have to plan if you're using illegal things, how you get around that, carrying a supply with you. And that was my situation. I was planning on being here for 4 exact days at the Las Vegas Convention Center and brought just enough heroin with me to make myself last, to have my last dosage be right before I boarded the plane to come home. And that's what I did. Although when I was boarding that flight to come home, for some reason, when we were at the gate, the airline announced that they were canceling the flight. They didn't tell us why, or give us any refund or book us on another flight, just you need to find another flight home. So for a struggling addict like myself, this was a big deal. I didn't have a supplier here. I didn't know my way around this city or town. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, at that point, getting home was not the biggest priority. It was figuring out how to stop myself from going into full-on heroin opioid withdrawal, which is a major physical, mental, everything issue. So, in the several days that I waited on a flight here, as my body started to take on the horrific effects that it does with that particular type of addiction, I, like a lot of people, I got on Google and WebMD to start Googling my symptoms and finding remedies that would help with my ailments. And I came across all of this news and I don't want to use the word propaganda, that can have negative connotations, but testimonials, rather, of people sharing about this natural, legal health remedy that people were using for opioid addiction and detox, as well as a whole variety of other things. And I had actually never heard of it before. It was called Kratom. So I left the airport here. I went to the nearest tobacco, smoke, vape shop, whatever you want to call them, and actually purchased a product that I had never seen before, and went and took these pills. I didn't know much about it, but I continued to research them. It ended up being a godsend for those of you who believe in God here. It didn't fix my problem, but at the same time, it made it manageable, which started me on the path to recovery. And because of that, in the years since, not to tell too much of my own story here, but I had the opportunity to run for Senate in a very close race in my own state. I became a private pilot. I became a licensed skydiver and now travel the world competitively skydiving. I've got to come and advocate for incredibly important things like we're doing here today with the Consumer Protection Act. And that all started with just a very simple direction in my path of going to see somebody who knew about Kratom and its effects and how to talk to consumers about it in this vape shop. And again, because of that, I'm alive and I'm here today. So, and I know that this story, it may be something that's similar to a lot of y'all's stories here, or other people that you may know that have struggled with addiction. So I hope to be a representative of that and to help share why that's important, because there's nothing special about me. I am like so many other Americans that struggle, whether it's heroin or opioids or pills, or I've heard so many stories today of how it's changed lives. And I want people to hear that, not just because it's important to me, it's important to those who are struggling, to those who haven't even grown old enough yet in America to understand the dangers of drugs or what addiction can do to you or do to your family. So I want to thank you guys for making this your mission, to help change our world for the better, so people can access this, to protect this product for both distributors and manufacturers as well as consumers. I think it has incredible potential. Some of our esteemed guests were talking about earlier the effects or the benefits of studying psychedelics and other natural remedies. It's an incredibly, I think as you mentioned, Jim, it's an incredibly underserved market in America. So this is important work. Thank y'all for being here. Thank y'all for valuing this, and I look forward to seeing your work in years to come and how we make a better America.
Will, thank you. Thank you very much. All of us understand the importance of warning labels on our products, and I have to give you a warning label about our next speaker. If I had a quarter for every time John Shinholser has used certain words in the English language that aren't in the dictionary, I'd be a rich man. But I got a commitment from him. He wasn't going to do that today, but he's triggered by other use of profanity. And here you have the former drug czar curse in his talk to you. He said the word damn, and I know that triggered John. And so I just warn you in advance, and some of you ladies may not have heard some of these words before, but John will educate you on that. John Shinholser is one of the leading addiction recovery specialists in the United States. He was the founder, along with his wife, of the McShin Foundation, which is the largest nonprofit addiction recovery facility and program in the state of Virginia. But beyond that, because of his influence in the community, he is recognized throughout the country, and I can testify to you, having been in other areas of the country outside of Virginia, he's recognized, literally recognized by these people as one of the leaders in the addiction recovery community. And I know in the Kratom community, we struggle with educating those in that community that provide these kinds of vital services about the value that Kratom has. And John has a very unique story about how he found that Kratom can help people. So I'd like John, and control yourself. I'd like John.
Thank you, Matt. I actually gave a sermon at church 3 weeks ago. And my Facebook, one of the things you do, it pops up every year, where were you? And I think it was 6 years ago, I was on Face the Nation, so I didn't cuss then either. But, you know, I got to thank the Marine Corps for saving my life, because actually when I was 23 years old, in between my second and third deployment, my battalion commander, he gave me the option of the brig or treatment. And, you know, two things we know about the brig is the food's horrible and the women were fake. So I went to treatment, and I've been clean and sober now almost 42 years. And, you know, and what's significant about that is here's one day you're a dead man walking, your life's over. Fast forward almost 42 years, I'm speaking before you guys about my experience with Kratom in the industry and living a blessed life in recovery. I mean, you know, it's a long story. There'll be a movie coming out one day, I'm sure. Probably when I'm dead, though. And I've come to the conclusion, you never hear that phrase, you know, you're the chosen one. You know I was chosen for this lifestyle. Now, I'm not a religious person, but I'm definitely a chosen one. I can promise you that. But here's the hit. If I'm the chosen one, then you're the chosen one if you hear what I'm saying. So I'm going to give all y'all a hit before we leave up out of here, so pay attention. This is important. You know, a few years back, without too much detail, we do drug testing in our recovery center. And I'm guessing maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago. I'm not good with time. Or ask my wife, she'll tell you all kinds of things I can't remember. But the kids were testing for Kratom, and I had no idea what it was. So, you know, we pull these kids, and I say kid because I'm 65, and they believe they're younger than me, the kids. I have a couple of adults who in the back to see. But I asked them, what is Kratom? And they started explaining to me, well, you know, it helps me with my anxiety, I got chronic pain, it helps with that, I got PTSD. But here's one hit, here's the hit. We didn't know they were on nothing. If it wasn't for that drug test, we would have never known. So here are some normal recovering people. At the time, I didn't realize that they found a substance that helped them with their condition, so they did not have to take the more dangerous and harmful prescribed medication. Because one thing about a recovery center, it is difficult to get people off of pharmaceuticals, more so, if not equal to fentanyl. These kids, they grow up on Adderall and benzodiazepines and God knows what other medication. You know, they get into fentanyl. Point is this, after maybe a year of this, I asked the kid, where are you buying this stuff? Well, we get it at the vape shop, you know. So I go over there, and there it is, right next to the bath salt, you know. That don't look good, you know. China chemicals, what I'm thinking. And, but they keep being adamant about the value of Kratom. And, you know, being an addiction guy, you know, we heard all these stories before, right? But I hadn't heard Kratom before. Finally, one of the kids said, look, there's a guy in town that knows all about it, because I'm asking real questions he don't have the answer to. So he takes me over to this kid in the neighborhood, and he introduced me to a whole new way of thinking, a whole new way of life, a whole new way of possibilities. And he at the time, I didn't know, but he began my journey to be a Kratom advocate. And he's actually in the room tonight. And he's a very shy man, he's very humble, he don't like never be called out, but David Diane right there. Raise your hand, David. Sorry, I say that because if Matt really got a problem with my cussing, but he's the one that introduced me to you. You see him for my cussing. But the long story short, you know, we did a survey a few years back. We took 30 opiate addicts on fentanyl off the streets of Richmond, gave them a week sober living and access to Kratom for a week, and 29 out of 30 successfully detoxed. And you can thank David for that survey. He made that happen. And it's amazing. The 30th guy run off because he had a pocket full of money and a stripper girlfriend. So he saw no need to stop. Well, shortly thereafter, Virginia expanded Medicaid, and now we have a Suboxone clinic on every corner. So I think that was a turning point for, you know, some real movement in Kratom back then. But I started getting on my board of directors of a charity that I'm the founder of, that I just retired from a month ago, that's a multi-million charity that has literally provided a model nationwide that's modeled in all 50 states. But I kept after him because I'm a big believer in plant-based therapies. I'm a big believer in hit another hit. For 50 years, if you go to treatment for addiction, it's the same 50-year antiquated system of care, abstinence-based rehab. You know, don't drink, go to meat mindset. Well, we got 30 million Americans need recovery, and only a handful are getting help. The other 80% won't even entertain treatment because they don't want to give up a particular substance, whatever it is, whether it be a bong hit at night, a beer, or wine at the wedding, or whatever. So here I am, I'm fired up now, saying, look, gang, all my recovery people, my abstinence-based people I'm running with, we've got to be open-minded here. We can engage so many more millions of people as a segue into harm reduction and a better way of life. What are we doing? Why are we doing this work? Well, I'm telling you, man, stigma is strong everywhere. You know, stigma is strong with special interests. We're surrounded by a nation where we drive policy based on ideology and not science. And I think you just look at any issue being debated, if you follow the science, why are we having so much debate out there? Long story short, I think, and I'm certain that kratom and other plants is the next best thing to helping so many millions of Americans. And here's another thing. Obviously, the criminal justice system isn't really pushing for plant-based products. Am I right about that? They're still on the other side of the coin thinking. The FDA obviously is not our friends here. There's a lot of established organizations that can't even think outside of their own box. So it's really up to us to go on a massive education campaign, public relations campaign. We have got to educate people, go into these narrow-minded, biased, twisted thinking people and give them the truth and turn the tide on this war against kratom. And it's never an easy fight or battle. It takes persistence, it takes warriors, it takes gladiators, but it takes support. And I found out another thing, that there's this unspoken, like, civil war amongst the kratom industry. And I cannot be more honored or proud to be sided with the AKA on this, but these are the good guys. It's a real easy sell to policymakers, politicians, recovery folks, when you talk about regulation, properly manufactured products, safe products. You cannot compare a GMP kratom product to an illegal drug supply product that will kill you. There's just no comparison, okay? You can't, knowing the science behind the value of kratom and the very small, tiny adverse effect side of it, you can't compare the two. There is no comparison. There's no logical explanation why why you don't see, go to your local health department and get some kratom. You know, that's where we need to be and where I hope we're going. Now, I am long-winded, and the longer-winded I get, the less likely I'm going to use a cuss word. And I've got to prove to Mac this one time I can get in front of my people and you know, get past this dilemma we currently have. So, once again, here's the final hit. Look, you guys, if we're not fighting and bringing more people unified into this movement, because you're in a kratom recovery movement, whether you like it or not, then we're leaving it up to other people. And if we're not on that table, those policy tables, being part of those discussions, then we're going to end up on the menu. We're going to get eaten. So you listen to AK, you listen to Mac, you spread the word, you bring more people into this fight, and together, a few years down the road, you know, we have this bill in Congress. You don't got any idea how big that is? These guys going out on a limb to have a form what drugs are. You know, parlaying with us, and now we're drawing in will, and we got law enforcement down here saying we've been wrong. Well, no kidding, we all do that anyway. But the point is, together we can drive this thing home and win this thing. But it's not going to be easy. But like a good Marine, you know, we ain't surrendering. We ain't going nowhere. And I got another 2 hours of content, but I'm sure I'm not. Thank you so much.
If I were to pick up the phone and call John's wife and say he got 3 through that speech without profanity, she would say, "Not my husband." So, thank you, John, that was terrific. I said earlier about this great progress that we have made, and obviously we have from 2016 to today, because things are better, right? Things are better for most people. We have some people that are not better. There are people struggling in their communities, having a tough time, and there are resources that are fabulous resources. For example, like Forgotten Not Gone, a veterans organization here in Las Vegas, national organization. We have a representative here. Thank you for being here. We appreciate everything you do. They serve veterans, and part of their program for veterans that have injuries, that suffer with these issues about suicides and addictions and that kind of thing, and Kratom is a part of their program. The Guidrys who founded that program unfortunately couldn't be here personally. They have a family wedding out of town, but we're grateful for Forgotten Not Gone, so thank you so much for being here. She's not in the room right now, but those that came around our booth might have met Shana Brown. And I embarrass her routinely on this, but she is a true hero, but she's an example of a failed system. Because Shana Brown was arrested in the state of Alabama. She had purchased a Kratom product in Florida, drove into Alabama, was stopped in a traffic stop they had for DUIs. And they noticed and observed and found Kratom in her vehicle. She spent 9 months in jail this year, and over the past 9 months, with a $1 million bond on her head. And it was only after the judge finally reduced it and champions within the Kratom community were able to raise the money to bail her out of jail. But the failure of our system today in a state where Kratom is banned, it's a Schedule I substance, and anyone who possesses Kratom in the state of Alabama and a few other states. Shana, will you come up here and join me for a second? Just come on up, please. Anyone who possesses Kratom in the state of Alabama and in some other states, a few, is subject to a life imprisonment sentence. And Shana, where'd you go, Shana? Come up here. Shana is going to go before a judge here shortly, and she's going to be subject to prosecution by a failed policy where they're going to try to put her in jail for life. So our prayers have to be for her, and recognition in how we have to fight for her and others that face similar circumstances. And Shana is a champion in my view because she's done this with dignity. She's suffered with addictions, and she was using Kratom to help. And instead of recognizing that, you've got a state like Alabama that's about to penalize her unless people of good character and who have love in their hearts will understand that she doesn't deserve that kind of punishment. We need to be with her and fight with her. So thank you for being here.
I'm not good at talking like this really at all, but I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you because, I mean, y'all literally helped save my life.
Shana came to Washington, D.C. shortly after her release on bond, and she was with us at the congressional briefing in Washington, D.C., and got to face these public policymakers, and they heard her story. And it is moving people's minds about this, and is a perfect illustration of how we can't let this continue. And it's why the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act will be the lead in forcing those states, when it's enacted, forcing those states that have banned Kratom as a Schedule I substance, all at the behest of the FDA. Because the FDA promised all 6 of those states that you should do this, and we're about to schedule Kratom federally. That was the last state that banned Kratom was Rhode Island in 2017, the first part of 2017, on the belief that the FDA would deliver on their promise that they were going to schedule Kratom. And we know, based on the information from Dr. Joie that the FDA presented embarrassingly poor evidence and data. And today the FDA is wrong just as much as they were in 2018. And the indictment that Dr. Joie issued on it is just as powerful today, and even more so because now the FDA has science in their own shop proving that kratom is safe to consume. And yet they will not take down their import alerts, they will not change their webpage, which if you go on the FDA kratom webpage today, it has the same disinformation, the lies about kratom, that if you and I were to make that false statement to the federal government, they would arrest us and put us in jail. But they can do it with impunity, and that's why this act is so important. We've gone too long because John spoke too long. But we have a couple minutes for questions. If anybody has a question for any of the panelists that they would like to raise, we'll entertain them now. Yes, sir.
Government's supposed to be the smart people.
So who?
That's what we're told. I've got guys sitting here that are part of government. I've been part of government. How is it that these guys, the FDA, who were given through 6 years ago, are able to do this? Is this because of case type? Is it all about money?
Yes.
And how do we stop that? I mean, we're not trying to kill the snake, we've got to cut the head of the snake off. You guys are the experts, I don't care who picks it up. But clearly, this is like an impossible thing unless we actually identify the real cause. Why is it big pharma? Yes, they don't like plant-based, we're all aware of that. But how do we stop this with these geniuses that are hurting people, that are turn a blind eye? I mean, how many people died of kratom that they can say, oh, these people died of kratom? When every month, hundreds are dying from fentanyl, and we won't even stop it pouring in over our world. At what point does this become obvious to these experts that also work with the other? Do we have to annihilate K Street? What is happening? And it's not getting better, it's getting worse.
I give you my
So
answer.
before Diane takes this question, let me just tell you that you're replacing John for future events. Okay, just so you know.
You know, I think there's a lot of complexity. So some of the work that we do right now, we're actually, we oppose the proposed menthol ban, right? I look at government and I think sometimes there are special interests that, it's a variety of special interests. It's not just Big Pharma, it's not K Street, it's not the deep state. It's that we in government have been used to doing things in one way for way too long, and we put blinders on when something new and novel comes in. And kratom to me is exactly where cannabis was in the 1970s during the Schaefer Commission, who said it should never be scheduled, people should be allowed to home grow, it should be decriminalized, and yes, there's some risk, but it's public health risk that should not be a law enforcement intervention. And so, ideology, special interest, this is a real complex situation, but the FDA, from a regulatory power, I think has too much power. And it's up to Congress to reel them in. And I think about the work that we're doing on the menthol ban and the cigar bans and tobacco harm reduction. It's the same thing. The FDA, because of special interests, is to save the children from tobacco and vaping, are about to hand over a $30 billion industry to the illicit market. And if we think, but there's no understanding unintended consequences. You can't ban a product, who's going to enforce it? What do we, it's the more we invest in public health infrastructure, and leave law enforcement resources to go after the real bad actors. I completely agree with you there. We'd be better off. We cannot fix things through banning them. It's not serious policy, and that's just the nicest thing that I'm going to say about it, because I would be like John and throw out some cuss words if I could.
You presented something, and I agree, you said it earlier, base it on something. And the reality is, they're not.
They absolutely aren't.
Blinders on.
So do you, I'm hoping some people, thinking some people in the room probably care about the environment, care about the pollution, care about what's going on. Anyone in the room worry about that? And, okay, just check. So I just quickly Googled to make sure when you talk about, and I'm not picking on the FDA, this is a pick on the government to disabuse anyone of the notion that the government is really smart. On the FDA's website, if you can't make it, I thought it was still up, and it is. The best way to dispose most medication, unused expires, is take it to a drug take-back site, such as a government program. That doesn't work. You can immediately flush these potentially dangerous medicine down the toilet or discard the medicine in your trash at home. So if that gives you any sense of how current and up-to-date the FDA is in terms of thinking about what to do with these chemicals, of either flushing them down the toilet or putting them in the landfill, give you a little bit of sense of what they're thinking. I mean, I agree, it's not as simple as K Street lobbyists, things like that. And I don't think it's the FDA is in the pocket of big pharma. I think there's a historical bias. We've seen this in the supplements with the diets and vitamins industry 20 years ago.
1994.
The same thing in birth there.
And so, right, it didn't work then, but this is the mantra thing. What doesn't work the first time, let's try it a second time. Let's go down the third time, right? The definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. That's where they are. And again, it's not, I think, because they're necessarily bad, but there is an institutional bias that I hopefully over time, and with the influence of AKA, and truly thank God for AKA and what they're doing, it's going to get better.
So I can tell you that former Senator Everett Dirksen once said, and he was talking about Congress, but I think it applies to the FDA today too. He said, Congress can do any darn fool thing at once. He actually said damn fool thing, but I didn't want to trigger John. And usually does about every 10 seconds. They get power, and has to happen here is Congress has to rein the FDA in. We've given them so much authority because they're supposed to be the repository of all great science, and they're not, obviously following that as their statutory duty. So we've got work to do. We're going to continue to do it and work on it. Matt.
Yeah, Matt, I was just going to say that, you know, it's been said up there that they're not bad guys, they're not malevolent. When you out and out fabricate and you make things up and you lie, I would contend that might be being bad guys. And when they beat up foreigners to doctor reports to say that somebody died of a kratom overdose when it was not a kratom overdose.
When there's a bullet point?
Yeah. To me, that kind of bullying and collusion is corrupt.
Yes.
And Congress ought to hold them accountable.
So we can't end on any better note than that. And we want to thank everyone for coming here today and lending your voice. I failed to recognize Laura Romney, who's the chairman of the International Plant Herbal Alliance, a great advocate, and herself a great consumer. I met Laura in Utah when the Utah legislature was in the process of deliberating on and passing the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, the first in the country to do so. And Laura took the microphone as a witness and told her story about Kratom. And she's a soccer mom, right? She's not some drug addict and everybody say, oh, that's a terrible community. This is a soccer mom who had lost her ability to function because of a very unique and rare condition, neurological condition, and Kratom saved her. And she told that story, and I thought, wow, I've got to meet this woman because she's an advocate, an extraordinary advocate, and the kind of person that is the voice for people that have found Kratom and they benefited from it. So thank you, Lord, for being here and for your leadership. in this area. So we'll thank everyone for being here.